So, Atlantic City, it's dying. I don't know how it is.
This
That or it's already
is
dead.
Atlantic City, a barren, creepy, and forgotten resort town on the Jersey Shore, dominated by empty lots, surface parking, decrepit houses, and monstrous failing casinos.
Atlantic City used to be the
With
place to
occasional
go to.
glimpses of better times, this city may be the most depressing in America, and a true encapsulation of the postmodern world.
Jeez.
Declining population, high crime and poverty define this former gem of the mid-Atlantic, a continued freefall from grace, because this was Atlantic City.
And just to clear it up, this is the highest quality we can get to.
A booming tourist town, Atlantic City was home to grand and glorious hotels, the most famous boardwalk in the world, popular beaches, high-profile events, and an impressive nightclub scene. The town's streets were lined with beautiful Americana architecture that was very charming, even for Americans back then, when every town was built classically. Simply put, Atlantic City was America's favorite getaway. Atlantic City had always been a resort town from when it was first established in the mid-19th century. It was meant to be an affordable option for Philadelphians to have a beach vacation, as tourism was growing in the US at the time, and urban residents wanted to escape the dense city.
Wait, is that like that
as
duck?
tourism was
Oh my god.
growing
They
in
actually
the
had it back then too. That's
US
crazy.
at the time, and urban residents wanted to escape the dense city to have an outdoor experience.
Like those duck cars that they
A rail
drive
line
into
was
the
laid
water?
out in a straight line from Philadelphia to the South Jersey Shore.
I didn't know they had it
and
back
there
then.
was Atlantic City. By the 1870s, rail was bringing in over 500,000 tourists to Atlantic City annually, with trains dropping off visitors next to luxurious hotels by the beach.
Wow.
It was also around this time that the boardwalk was built, in order to prevent as much sand as possible from being dragged into the hotels. This boardwalk wound up being a resounding success, and Atlantic City's popularity exploded, with new train lines bringing in people from all over the country. As the decades continued and we approached the 1920s, large grandiose hotels lined the boardwalk, along with an array of small businesses and attractions. And the city was referred to as the nation's playground, and in some cases, the world's playground, which was only exacerbated by prohibition, as many of the back rooms of restaurants and nightclubs were known for illegal drinking. And in the off-season, Atlantic City was known for hosting big events such as Miss America and large conventions in Boardwalk Hall, one of the largest arenas in the country at the time, when it was built in 1929.
We were doing this
The
well.
thriving community had theaters, prominent clubs, and sprawling piers, but the actual locals had a neat experience as well. Beautiful row houses on narrow roads with local shops and amenities in walking distance. And the main streets like Atlantic and Pacific Avenues were built up with beautiful churches and municipal buildings, as good as anywhere else in the country at the time. Atlantic City is where saltwater taffy was invented, and where Monopoly got all of its property names from. And so, where did it all go invented? And where Monopoly...
Boardwalk. Oh my god, it is. Wow. Wow.
All of its
Who
property
knew? I didn't know that.
And so, where did it all go wrong? Well, it boils down to a few things. Firstly, amusement parks like Great Adventure, Disneyland, and Disney World started to become more popular for families for weekend and summer getaways, meaning places like Atlantic City were losing out. Also, cheap airfare had also become a thing, and so people, particularly Northeasterners, started to vacation in places much farther away from home, such as Europe, Florida, California, and Vegas. Additionally, once the car became the primary mode of travel rather than rail, Atlantic City had to adjust and hence raised many of its tight-knit blocks to make way for parking lots, which, as we discussed several times on this channel, seriously ruptures the vitality and enjoyability of places. But what the rise of individual car ownership and a rising middle class of the mid-20th century also meant was people's outdoor vacations were now in much more remote locations, perhaps in vacation homes or timeshares. On top of this, suburbanization also meant that many of the residents fled Atlantic City for a larger house and a longer commute, meaning whatever wealth the casinos generated no longer trickled down to Atlantic City directly, but more so to the far.
But isn't Atlantic City more a place for adults to be at rather than kids? So technically they should have still been surviving, right?
far out suburbs. All
Or
of
were
this new
kids able to go
competition
there?
meant
Oh no,
Atlantic
kids were
City
able to
had
go
to
there. Never mind.
expand
Never
beyond
mind.
its original model. And so it went from being a beach resort town to a casino town, with gambling becoming the new bread and butter, taking a page out of the Las Vegas playbook,
There you go.
essentially trying to become the Vegas of the Northeast,
Okay.
and on the beach. Not a bad idea on the surface, but ultimately, it didn't work out. Atlantic City's beautiful, ornate hotels made way for ultra-modern casinos with no redeeming aesthetic qualities, shifting Atlantic City from a picturesque beach town to, well, Vegas with water. And while this was sort of the goal, as I had mentioned, I think it's fair to say that it went down that route far too literally. These buildings were obnoxiously out of place and made the town feel eerie, and the disrespect these developments had on Atlantic City's cultural heritage doesn't take a history buff to notice and be repulsed by. It looks and feels forced and inauthentic, simply a lesser version of
sort
what
of.
already exists elsewhere. To be fair, there was a bounce back period in the 80s when Atlantic City initially went down this gambling direction, but as Vegas only grew exponentially in popularity and gambling became legal throughout the country, Atlantic City missed out once again.
Oh.
And the casinos have largely now failed.
And now, rather than having a city that, yes, is a shell of its former self, but at the very least retains the charm and aesthetic of what once was, giving hope for a possible return to glory or at least some rejuvenated
It
spirit,
needs some love.
instead you have a city a shell of its former self that's more than half empty, and with dystopian-like skyscrapers dotted around where great buildings once stood. It's severely underappreciated in America just how insane and dramatic this is. This is how Atlantic City has transformed over the years.
And like you realize we come a long way from something. Like it was good, and then we let something die out when we could have let it keep growing. Maybe they're having a hard time keeping up, right? And they had to do what they had to do, but it's just something that was successful ended up flopping. Wow, look at that. Jeez.
Perhaps Atlantic City, with rising competition, had no hope in maintaining its previous high status.
Maybe.
But in trying to cling on to changing demands, it wound up shooting itself in the foot time and time again, raising its beautiful streets and hotels, building ugly with no regard for the town's history or previous redeeming qualities, and simply transforming Atlantic City from the seaside playground that America had fallen in love with to towering gambling dens had put the nail in the coffin, rather than adapt and progress the city as was hoped. We've discussed on this channel before how many great cities and towns have also had to adapt and take on a new life as decades, generations, and centuries have gone by, but that in doing so, their beauty, heritage, and aesthetic culture were maintained, and if not, were enhanced, but in a way that carried on the previously laid out building traditions.
So Atlantic
This
City
can
had that
refer to
problem.
Venice no longer being a financial hub, but still a thriving tourist destination, London rebuilding itself after the Great Fire, Haussmann building the great boulevards of Paris, or San Francisco moving away from shipping and into technology. But this list can go on and on and on. But rather than adapt and enhance, Atlantic City destroyed and abandoned. That's
So
the
they
core
did
of
it
the
to
issue here.
themselves almost.
I think ironically that had Atlantic City hadn't changed anything, maintained its historical hotel buildings and neighborhoods, its family-friendly environment, and even so far as a strong rail system to bring people in and out of the place, that it would be extremely successful in the present day as both a beach destination for Philadelphians and as a rare slice of the classic Americana experience for people to enjoy. As someone that spent much time in Santa Cruz, California, a touristy beach town with an iconic boardwalk and a fair amount of historical and classically styled buildings, I have seen firsthand that this demand is there. Just look at this hotel that's being built there, for example.
Wow.
Beautiful, and an authentic classical style that is home in California. While it's always easier to say these things in hindsight, I'm also not necessarily blaming Atlantic City. It went through a period of decreasing popularity and simply looked towards the trends throughout the rest of the country and how to develop to try to fight back. We all know now, decades later, that these methods of prioritizing automobiles, destroying iconic buildings, and creating modernist and ugly places is just never going to be the answer. Nobody wants to hang out in a place that looks like this. Sadly, it's probably just too late for Atlantic City to ever bounce back now, but we can learn from this. Being distinctive is the key for placemaking because it creates character, identity, and something memorable.
Keep the
In
history
bad
of it.
times, cities with a rich history and culture should adapt, but never destroy or disregard what
Mhm.
made them distinctive. And this, I think, applies to almost all cities and towns throughout the world, as modernism threatens to remove the distinctive culture and aesthetic of places wherever it touches.
It's almost as if you have to keep the history of it, because I think that they killed why people were coming there is because of how it looked, like you said, right? If they didn't destroy the buildings that they did, right? They kept the buildings but upgraded here and there, but kept the aesthetic of it, people would have still visit to this day. Maybe not as much, but people would still go there, right? And then like people who are going there to now, right? Generations, right? They would be going, oh, your grandfather used to come here. Oh, your great grandfather used to be here. Like it's the history part that you just get to see what your elders got to see when they were there, right? But so they almost did it to themselves, and it's unfortunate because you never want to see that happen. But Atlantic City was booming, and then turns out it just went boom.